Anybody else that's interested in talking about the argument?
I guess I don't really understand what the Bayesian apparatus is adding to the basic idea behind a fine-tuning argument. So it seems like you're saying something like there are a lot of ways you could imagine the world to be, and there's only a small number of ways in which you could imagine that the world is one that permits life. Is that sort of like the basic idea?
Yeah, the basic idea. So I think the idea with Bayes is the way we want to evaluate evidence is we want to compare probabilities. Like they do this in science all the time. Like if you want to compare Newtonian mechanics and general relativity, they're going to look at evidence like on the orbit of Mercury. And you find that relatively the predictions are much more accurate. Now, Newtonian mechanics, technically they're compatible with the orbit of Mercury. It's improbable that it would be so under Newtonian mechanics. So what you want to do is kind of compare the probabilities, and that's how you weigh the evidence. So, and in the fine-tuning argument, you're kind of weighing the evidence for theism and for naturalism using the statistical method.
Okay, so basically you're saying there's a lot of ways I can imagine the world to be, and there's a small subset out of that number of, let's say, possible worlds or whatever, that include conditions that would permit life, right? And so then I take it then the next step is just to say, well, what could explain this, right?
Yeah.
But it just sounds like you're saying something that's basically empty when you say a being that has the desire to produce a universe with physical constants tuned within those narrow ranges or something like that, has the desire to produce that and has the ability to do so and doesn't have countervailing reasons not to do so and is like mostly rational or something like that. And if you build that into your hypothesis, you get the prediction of that outcome, right? But that just seems like empty, right? Like it just seems like the construction of a just so story. I don't see why that would be an interesting hypothesis.
So so an analogy I presented was say that scientists found that the Gospel of John was written on every atom. Everybody would concede that's evidence for God. You could go and say, oh, that's an empty hypothesis. But a being with a desire to communicate the Gospel of John just decided to write that. But of course, it's evidence. The evidence doesn't always point to conclusions that you or I might like. So, yeah.
I know, but I wasn't denying that it's evidence. It just doesn't seem to me to be an interesting hypothesis, right? I think it's very easy to get evidence for a hypothesis, right? So, like, if I found that my shoes weren't, if I left my shoes outside my bedroom, when I went to bed, I woke up in the morning, they were gone. That's evidence for shoe stealing theories, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you can kind of get tripped up in Bayes if you formulate hypotheses in ad hoc ways without independent motivations.
Okay, what's the independent motivation supposed to be? Because obviously, if there's independent motivation, it wouldn't be a just so story, right?
Yeah.
What I'm understanding a just so story to be is something that's constructed without independent motivation. So when I said this just seems to be a just so story, all you needed to say was, no, it's not, because there's independent motivation. So what is that?
So yeah, of course. Like the question is, you're gonna compare like the like say like the shoe stealing fairy. You can compare the shoe stealing
No, no,
fairy.
but what's the independent motivation in this case?
Like an independent motivation would be like someone like Robin Collins. He points out that the kind of mathematical beauty that you find in the fundamental laws of nature, that the intelligibility of the laws of nature, the discoverability of the universe,
That just
and
sounds
stuff.
like you're building more stuff into your
Well,
hypothesis.
no, it's not
That
built in. It's part of a cumulative case.
no, no,
Like
no,
that's
no,
the stuff.
no, 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 no. You're just saying, here's another fact that we can't explain, right? Let's imagine an agent who desires that fact, has the ability to do so, doesn't have strong countervailing reasons not to do so, and then um, is mostly rational, and that predicts that fact, right? So that just seems like what's called spurious unification to me.
No, that's definitely not clear to me. And
But do you understand what I mean by that?
I mean, not really. Could you elaborate?
Sorry, what'd you say?
Yeah, could you elaborate on what you mean? It's not clear.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't. See, there's an explanatory virtue called the virtue of unification, right? Which is the idea that a range of data is explained by hypothesis. But there's something called spurious unification, right? There's something called spurious unification, which is just the idea that you build in uh, extra motivations or predictions, uh, into your hypothesis so as to capture more phenomena. But in fact, it's not some simple hypothesis that predicts that range of hypotheses. It's by adding in independently these additional assumptions into the hypothesis that you get those predictions. And so, in fact, it doesn't actually have the virtue of explaining a number of things uh, by one small set of propositions, that constitute the hypothesis, but by adding in additional propositions.
So just probably like I posted the premises of my argument. Is there any premise that you specifically disagree with?
I was trying to avoid the Bayesian apparatus, see if we can look at the argument without that, the Bayesian apparatus, look at the basic idea behind the argument. Because I don't see how the Bayesian stuff, right, isn't going to be addressed by the kind of response that Detroyer gave, right? But it seems to me we don't really need any of that to figure out what the hypothesis is really saying, right? What the idea behind it really is. It seems like it just conforms to the idea that I gave, which is we have something unexplained. In order to explain it, we posit an intelligent being who has the desire for that thing, has the ability to bring about that thing, doesn't have strong countervailing reasons not to do so, and is mostly rational. And I can do that for any unexplained phenomenon, which doesn't seem very interesting, right? And then you brought in the idea of independent motivation, but it sounded like the other stuff you were bringing in just seemed like it wasn't really independent motivation. It was actually a form of spurious unification, right? And so I'm just trying to understand how it's not that, or if there's some other way to make the hypothesis not ad hoc in the way that I was objecting to.
Okay, I use the example of the atom writing with the Gospel of John. Do you agree if that happened, that would be good evidence for theism?
No, I don't see why it would be. But
Oh,
again,
so
you could build into your theistic hypothesis a being that has a desire for that kind of thing, has a desire to produce, linguistic expressions of that kind or what have you, and then you'd have evidence for that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
as I say, evidence is something that comes cheap. It's very easy to get evidence for a hypothesis if all you're doing is saying, well, here's some unexplained fact. Let's imagine an entity that desires a fact of that kind to be instantiated and has the ability to do so, doesn't have strong countervailing reasons not to do so, and is mostly rational. Voila, I can explain any phenomenon by doing that, right? I don't think that's an interesting thing to do. I think constructing just those stories is not interesting. But you were appealing to some type of independent motivations. I asked you about those, and it just sounded like what you were appealing to was some way of spuriously unifying the phenomena, right? And I'm just asking how it isn't a case of that.
yeah, so I definitely feel that if you think God writing the Gospel of John on every atom wouldn't be evidence to theism, you're saying you're above evidence. So the way you say it, it's a bit amiss. But yeah. I think there's definitely like bigger questions if you want to build a cumulative case for theism, like something like
Yeah, but I'm
Richardson.
saying when you say cumulative case, I'm not seeing how that isn't spurious. The stuff that you appealed to, right, that you cited, that was supposed to be part of a cumulative case. I'm not seeing how that doesn't constitute mere spurious unification rather than the cumulative case it purports to be, right? But if you can explain how it's not that, how it's not spurious, I'd be happy to explore
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's definitely not spurious. Like if there was a rational intelligence who wanted to create a life within universe, and what we would expect that the other aspects, like the mathematical laws, that the mathematical laws that the universe is intelligible.
Show me
And
how
that
that's right.
that's probable on theism, but it's not very probable on naturalism. At least our expectation wouldn't be.
I'm asking you to produce the derivation.
Produce derivation. Like, like it's kind of epistemic probability, so it's somewhat subjective. But I think like the evidence, like if you look at the probabilities, they're so astronomically small on naturalism. Even if you start out with a small probability.
Yeah, see, I'm not interested in you repeating the claim. That's a waste of my time, and probably of everybody's time here. I'm interested in you deriving the prediction.
Yeah, I don't think there's any derivation. It's epistemic probability, so it's somewhat subjective. Like
Yeah, well, I don't see why anybody should be moved by that, right? If you can show me the objective part, maybe somebody would have.
okay, yeah. I don't know. There's been a couple of papers on it. I could look into it. Like, there's been some researchers studying the intelligibility of the universe and the chances that would happen. So I can definitely look into those papers and get back to you. I don't have them offhand.
Okay. Because I have to say, as it stands, it just seems like you've made no case at all, other than the very cheap case that I could make for shoe stealing fairies when I can't find my shoes, right? Which I think is totally uninteresting.
Yeah, no, but I think the case isn't analogous because, like, you compare the case on naturalism that you lose your shoes. It's not that small, but these life permitting probabilities, they're incredibly small on naturalism.
Yeah, you keep saying that, right? And I just don't see why. And that's just repeating the claim, right? I'm not interested
Wait.
repeating the claim.
So you don't agree that the probabilities are small on naturalism of a life permitting universe?
No, I'm perfectly happy to agree that they're. I'm happy to agree for the sake of argument, at least, that they're small on naturalism.
right? But the idea that they're not small on theism is not something I understand unless you just build into your hypothesis the prediction of the outcome you're seeking to explain, which, as I say, is totally uninteresting.
Yeah, I don't really think you have to build it into theism so much. Like, even if, like I say...
Yeah, you do, because as de Troyer explained, there's no expectation from the existence of an agent, right, or even a divine agent, right, that there should be universes at all, let alone life-permitting ones. You have to build in certain properties about the kinds of desires, motivations, intentions, what have you. It's facts about the character of that being in order to get that expectation. But that's just building in something like the desire to have intelligent life, right? Just like I can build in the desire to steal shoes into my hypothetical fairies if I'm trying to explain missing shoes, right? And if I'm trying to explain, missing money, I can build in, the desire to steal money into my hypothesis. I don't see how it's interesting to do that.
But see, the thing is, like, even say, like, in the traditional definition of God, he exists and he is morally good. Even if you think...
Well,
that
will just defeat your hypothesis right at the outset because of the existence of gratuitous evils, right? So I don't see how that's going to help.
No, well, that's other evidence to bring to bear. Even if you think there's like a 1 in 100 chance that this God would create a universe with conscious life, yeah, that's still, that might be small, but it's astronomically small in naturalism. So similarly, like, I don't know that...
That seems like constructing a just so story, right? I grant you can construct just so stories.
Yeah, man, but like, even if you think that God writing the Gospel of John on atoms wouldn't be evidence for God, I have a feeling that you're setting the bar somewhere where it's impossible to reach, you know?
I don't see what difference it makes what your feeling is, right? I'm just asking you to give me an argument that's more than a just so story.
Yeah, I think you're setting the bar a place where it's impossible.
Yeah, you keep saying that. You said that now a second time, right? I'm not interested in you telling me about your feelings, right? I'm interested in hearing an argument, right? I'm interested in you giving me something more than just the equivalent of a shoe-stealing fairy.
Well, as we can see from comparing the shoe-stealing fairy, it's really prejudicial argument, and you the shoe-stealing fairy is an extremely prejudicial argument, and you basically, and you criticize me for saying this, but I don't even see how that these requirements are possible to be met, given the kind of high standards you set.
I'm just asking for something more than a just so story.
So, give me the properties of an explanation involving an agent that aren't a just so story.
Novel predictions.
Okay, I think we might just have a difference of opinion. Definitely, I think like most people I talk to, they would consider it strong evidence if God.
Yeah, I don't care about. I don't care about.
So I think we have a fundamental disagreement that we won't be able to get past.
No, all you have to do is tell me what the novel predictions are.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think you can make novel predictions. You can evaluate evidence.
Okay, so you're conceding that your hypothesis doesn't generate novel predictions.
It depends on what you mean. So maybe sometimes evidence points in the direction of sunlight.
So yeah, so now tell me like, so I mean, let's say I grant for the sake of argument that a good being would
have the propensity to create life rather than not do so, right? I assume are we talking about an all-powerful, all-good being? Or is that, are you selecting something more modest than that?
I think I can work with the all-powerful, all-good being.
Yeah, so I mean, I just think, look, I mean, I think a logical problem of evil is sound, but like, even if I didn't confine myself to an argument that's strong, I would just say, evidentially, it's overwhelmingly unlikely that a being of that kind exists given apparent gratuitous evils, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it just
So you
wouldn't
definitely
be an
gotta.
interesting hypothesis if that's all that you had.
Yeah, well, yeah. Interesting is subjective. I just want to follow the evidence where it leads, man. And you weigh the probability. What's the probability that God would be evil? What's the probability that we'd live in a life-supporting universe or naturalism? And do you see these astronomical improbabilities? I think I'm coming down on the side of the fine-tuning evidence being more convincing. Does anyone else want to talk?
Yeah, I don't see why. I don't see why it's more convincing.
Well, yeah, of course. I'm sure your evaluations by yeah, the epistemic probability, it's subjective. So you might say, oh man, there's so much evil in the world. What's the probability that God would create a world with so much evil? Is it 1 by 10 to the 4, 1 by 10 to the 5?
Yeah,
Even
well,
if
I mean,
you,
I think it's a probability of one that an all-powerful, all-good God doesn't exist because of the logical problem. But even if I didn't believe in that, the logical problem was sound, it just seems like you know you'd expect a good person to prevent, if he was powerful enough to do so, to prevent one instant of, I don't know, intense torture or whatever, right? Um, and, you know, when it turns out that that person has not interceded to prevent billions of instances or whatever, millions, then you just get huge improbabilities that such a being exists, right?
yeah, but even if you say like it's 1 in a billion, it's still like you look at the odds of a life permitting universe on naturalism, and it looks even less. So
Wait, I didn't say anything about 1 in a billion. I said it's highly improbable that if somebody was powerful and totally morally upright, right, that if he didn't intercede to prevent one torture, right, that he actually has those properties, right? I'm just saying that that becomes astronomically more unlikely, right, as you get into the massive atrocities that we're aware of, right? Not to mention animal suffering and all of that, right? It's just crazy.
yeah, definitely, I agree that the problem of evil it's a huge challenge for theism. Does anybody else want to discuss the fine tuning argument? Because we could probably like restrict it to comments on the fine tuning argument right now.
Yeah, I also don't understand how you don't get an infinite regress with respect to the desires of that being. An infinite regress of fine tuners.
How do you mean, Jack?
No, it just seems like if the if the if it's improbable that there is a world in which the constants are finely tuned, physical constants are finely tuned
to permit life, right, then it seems like it's just as improbable that there's a being whose desires are finely tuned to produce universes that are finely tuned to permit life, right? And so
Uh,
we would postulate a designer of that being, right? And we'll just get an infinite regress of finely tuned designers, right? So I just take it that this type of argument is just, given that it's not independently justified, right? It's just attempting to explain something that might be brutally contingent, right? But not offering anything but an additional explanatory cost, right? Which is like a violation of parsimony and ontological economy, right?
yeah, I definitely think that's an unjustified assumption. I see people commenting in chat about asking to engage with others. I just wanted to keep it on topic on the fine-tuning argument.
No, this is about fine tuning. I'm saying that there's
But you brought up the
an
whole
additional
problem with
cost.
evil.
No, this
Yeah,
part
yeah,
had nothing to do with the problem of evil. Maybe you weren't listening,
yeah.
right? I was
I listened to
saying,
that.
I was saying that positing a designer seems to incur a cost, right? An explanatory cost, which is to say it's explanatory vicious rather than virtuous, given that the facts that it seeks to explain, right, are just reproduced at another level. And the only way to arrest the brute contingency that the argument is seeking to dissolve, right? Well, there is no way to arrest it because you're just going to have brute contingency somewhere in the course of the regress, right? Otherwise, you just have an infinite chain of designers, and that itself seems like a brutally contingent fact. So I don't think there's any way to arrest the brute contingency. And so, given that you're not in any way dissolving brute contingencies, you're just postulating an additional entity, right? You're violating the virtues of parsimony and ontological economy. And that just seems to me to be explanatorily vicious.
Yeah, you seem to be making a number of assumptions I don't expect. Like, it doesn't follow at all that God would require a designer. So, yeah, I don't accept
I didn't
that
say anything
assumption.
about require. I just don't see what the asymmetry is there.
But your whole argument was that I need to have another designer to explain God. I don't accept that assumption.
What's the problem with what's the asymmetry in the two cases?
Wait, but what two cases are you talking about? Could you repeat that?
Yeah, if I posit a being that has finely tuned desires, right? Why is it that I wouldn't infer on the by parity of reasoning to a designer of that being who finely tuned the first being's desires in the same way that I infer to a designer of a universe that appears to have finely tuned physical constants?
Yeah, so the way I spelled out my argument, the premises, it's compatible with another inference. It's just weighing the state of the evidence for theism over naturalism.
What's the disanalogy in the two cases?
The synergy in the two cases was that
Yeah,
it's really not.
aren't there many ways that a being that has the power to produce universes, right? Aren't there an astronomical number of different ways his desires could be?
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, I'm not seeing the asymmetry. You just seem to be engaging in some kind of special pleading, and I don't think that's an interesting way to dodge the objection.
But keep in mind that even if like the objection is true, all the premises of my argument are intact. But yeah, I think there's definitely an asymmetry because the desires originate
It
from
doesn't
the
matter whether the premises of your argument are attacked, right? Because I've exposed an explanatory vicious component to your argument. That's the problem, right?
yeah. It's not.
Just by appealing to considerations of parsimony and ontological economy alone, I'd have reason to reject the conclusion of your argument.
Yeah. But I think but even like if you look at the structure of my argument, it's not the fact by itself these constants have this particular value that needs to be explained. Improbable stuff happens all the time. We just need to compare different worldviews and see how they measure up.
Yeah, well, I don't see how you've shown that those are not explanatory vices, and that a non-theistic world would be favored.
I know. Yeah, it's really not clear that the explanatory vices, and like I said, it doesn't really have much to do with the structure of my argument. But I'm not even sure.
I never said it had anything to do with the structure of your argument. You understand that that's how comparing worldviews works, right? It's by comparing explanatory virtues and vices, right? So it's entirely appropriate for me to invoke those considerations in this context.
I guess, but I don't know. The comments seem to think I'm being pinned. But what I see here is like you're following this part of reasoning. It's not quite related to my argument, but it's like in general related.
You're just not understanding the objection. You just said, right, that the argument turns on comparing worldviews, right? It isn't just about explaining something that's improbable, right? It has to do with explaining worldviews, right? Now I take it that means you're trying to say that the theistic worldview is more explanatory virtuous, right, than an atheistic
not
worldview.
necessarily. That's a bigger claim that I'm meaning. Like, so at the start, you said evidence is cheap. Evidence can still be very powerful. So I think that's.
I never denied that evidence can be powerful. I said it's easy to get evidence. It's easy to construct a hypothesis for which there's evidence, right? It's very, very easy to do that, right? And I showed you the procedure. Procedure is just take any unexplained fact and say there's an intelligent being that has the power to bring about that fact, has the desire to do so, doesn't have stronger countervailing reasons not to do so, and is irrational, is not a massively irrational being, right? And that will weakly predict, at the very least, that phenomenon, right? And I can do that for any unexplained phenomenon, right? And so given that evidence is cheap in that sense, right, what we're interested in is in hypotheses that do more than just function as just so stories, right? We're interested in hypotheses that are highly explanatory virtuous, often in virtue of things like novel predictions, right? Your hypothesis, you can see, doesn't generate novel predictions. So,
but naturalism doesn't generate novel predictions in the same
yeah, well, I'm
way.
not a naturalist, but it doesn't matter. The point is that an atheistic hypothesis, right, doesn't have to deal with if they say, well, this is a brutally contingent fact, right, then it acknowledges a brute contingency, right, that exists in your hypothesis that's unexplained, right, because you're presumably your hypothesis is not
that there's an infinite regress of designers, right? You're just imagining there's one designer and that it's a brutally contingent fact that he has a desire for this kind of universe. So you have the same amount of improbability in your hypothesis because your hypothesis has no explanation for why he has those desires, right? Just like if I say how the physical constants are finely tuned, how they're tuned is a brute contingent fact. I'm not offering an explanation, right? So we both got same amounts of brute contingency, but you're adding in this additional entity, right, that doesn't dissolve the brute contingency in general, right? It just dissolves it at the first order level and reproduces it at the second order level, right? But it's not parsimonious and it's not ontologically economical, right? And I'm just saying on that basis alone, I'd have strong reason to reject your hypothesis as explanatorily vicious.
Yeah, but I think like the big counterexample to your example would be the Gospel of John argument. And you say, "Oh, Gospel of John, this is written on these atoms."
I don't know why you keep bringing that up, right?
Because it's a really good argument.
It's not.
Yeah,
It's
you
not
could say
showing.
just
It's not
brute
showing.
contingency, but
Is it
it's
showing
quite
that
wrong.
there's? Is it showing there's something wrong with my reasoning? Because I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, because you could say.
So what's the error in my reasoning?
Yeah, of course.
Am
you
I
could say-
am I mistaken about the fact that the brute contingency is the same in both hypotheses? Am I mistaken about that?
Like you could say, "Oh, it's the Gospel of John is written on every."
It's a yes or
atom."
no question.
That's a brute contingency.
It's a yes or no question.
I'm using a reductio on.
I'm asking you: is the brute contingency the same? Yes or no?
I don't think it's the same, no. But even like.
Yeah. So when you say it's not the same, if that's your objection to my argument, I'm asking you to
that's not-
show me. I'm asking you to explain to me how, of all the different ways, right, in which an intelligent being could have their, of all the different types of desires it could have, right, how it is that the desire for this type of universe is not as improbable, right, as this type of universe is, right, granting that it's improbable for the sake of argument.
So I'm doing a reductio on your views.
I didn't ask you
And
that.
can say the Gospel
I
of
didn't
John
ask you about
is
that.
written
You're
on
just not.
every
You're just
atom.
not. You're just
And
not
that's a
addressing
brute
the. You're just
contingency.
now. Why are you over talking me? You're just not addressing the point. So how about explaining to me what the asymmetry is in the two cases?
I don't have to get into the asymmetry now. I can do.
Okay,
a
so then
reduc-
you're going to drop that objection,
I'm
right?
going to do the reductio on your views.
So
And you
so you aren't offering a criticism that in fact the level of brute contingency is the same in both hypotheses, right?
I think the more powerful objection.
That's a yes or
is
no
my-
question.
I think I can, but I can.
A yes
offer
or
a
no
more
question. So you're not doing that, right? So let's just agree then that the fine tuning. I'm sorry, the level of brute contingency that's being, sorry, the level of improbability, right, with respect to brutally contingent facts is the same in both hypotheses. Okay. So now the second question is going to be.
No, but let me speak. I'm going to offer a reductio of your views.
No, that's not what we're
Instead,
doing.
we
That's
found the gospel.
no. That's not what we're doing right now. I was asking you to show me the problem with my reasoning, and I'm taking you through the reasoning step by step so you can show me where you disagree.
Okay, so
Okay.
my
So no. There's nothing for you to say right now.
Let me tell you about.
Since you're withdrawing your objection that the level of improbability differ in the two hypotheses, and they're perfectly symmetrical with respect to the improbability of the desires that God has, and the improbability of the physical constants being tuned within the range that they're tuned at. We grant that they're on a par, right? So then the question is
So
it?
can I say
So then the
something?
question, no, there's nothing for you to say.
What?
The question is, no. I'm not interested in going down in avoiding you I'm not interested in avoiding you backing up your claim, right? There's something wrong with my reasoning. So we're going to go through my reasoning and you're going to show me where it goes wrong, right? So the next question is, right?
Okay, so
If
could you go back
the
to
two, if now you're just over talking me again. If the two hypotheses are on a par with respect to the improbability, with respect to improbability, is it the case, or is it the case that you are doing something that, is it the case or is it not the case that you are doing something less parsimonious and less ontologically economical by positing this additional entity to explain the first order improbability, right, which reproduces that improbability at the second order? So is it less parsimonious or more parsimonious?
Hey, could I just say something?
No. I want to know the answer to that question. Is it less parsimonious or not?
Yes. So let me just respond to ask yourself in the chat. So like personally, I'm not stuck with anything. Personally, I feel like
Dude, you're having a conversation with Jack right now. You're not having a conversation with the text chat. Just talk to the person who's. You know how rude it is when he's sitting here giving you his time, politely doing his best not to get angry with you, walking you through a topic, and you're not listening and reading chat. Like, listen to the dude who's giving you his time. Don't just listen to him. Sorry, Jack. What did you ask him?
I asked him whether or not it's less parsimonious to posit a being that in which it's a brutally contingent, highly improbable fact that it has a desire to produce universes of this kind, rather than all the other kinds of desires it could have, right? Rather than to just posit that the fine-tuning of the the physical constants is a brute contingent fact. I'm asking whether his hypothesis is less parsimonious or not.
So I would say I disagree that God's desires, the brute contingent fact explained by God, is a necessary being. It's a contingent fact, but not a brute one. And
When you say that his desires are necessary, what does that mean?
I'm not saying his desires are necessary. I'm saying he is necessary, and the desires are a contingent.
Wait a minute,
fact.
but if he's necessary, is that compatible with his desires being all kinds of different ways or not?
Yeah, I think that's compatible.
Great, so then the necessity is completely odious with respect to the question of the probability or improbability of the desires that he has. So what desires he has are going to be brutally contingent, I take it, right?
Not brutally so, because what I understand by brute is you mean not having an explanation. An explanation would ultimately...
What's the explanation for the fact that the desires he has are one way rather than another?
It's ultimately going to come back to God on his free choice.
I don't see how that's just not saying it's brutally contingent.
Well, but what I took you to mean by brute is having no explanation, but it does have an explanation.
What explains why God chooses A over B?
That's ultimately God's free choice.
Yeah, that just sounds like brute contingency to me, right?
Oh, well, by brute, do you mean something without an explanation?
Yeah, you're saying
Yeah, but the explanation is God.
that's just repeating the claim, right? The claim in question is God has reasons to do A, he has reasons to do B, right? Therefore, he has a choice between the two, right? And if I ask you what explains why he does A rather than B, you just say God, right? But that's already built into the question. I'm asking why God chooses A rather than B. And you saying because he's God doesn't answer the question, because him being God is compatible with him freely choosing B.
No, it's God's free choice. and it's not determined.
You're just not understanding the objection.
I understand the objection, and I'm saying it's God's free choice, so it's not determined.
I didn't
But-
say anything about determinism.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. Then I misunderstood your objection about why you choose A rather than B. Hey, Jack. Question: is there any other aspect of the argument you want to discuss a little bit? Hey, Jack.
Sorry, I don't see why we should move on, but unfortunately, I have to go into a screening right now. But yeah,
Oh.
I mean, I have like probably like 100, something like 100 different objections to fine-tuning arguments. I think fine-tuning arguments are complete garbage. So I'd be happy to talk about the other objections once we've dealt with the ones that we're dealing with now. Unfortunately, I have to leave. So, maybe what you can do is think about, right, given the fact that God having free choice is compatible with him doing either A or B, that's not an explanation for why he does one rather than the other. And next time you can come back and tell me how him having libertarian free choice in any way is not tantamount to why his doing A rather than B is a true contingent fact. But we'll have to pick that up next time. Sorry. Maybe Venus will wake up and we'll deal with this.
All right.
Or
Cool,
maybe
yeah,
Detroit.
Hopefully, that's cool. Hopefully, I can talk about your objection some other time. Definitely, and I definitely hopefully we can talk a bit more about my reductio of your view and how you would answer that. So, yeah, great to see you and talk
All right,
some other time.
so long.